is here. Good evening. Welcome to the annual joint meeting with the City Council and the schools for the financial forecast for the next fiscal year, FY 2027. I welcome the City Council and the Administrative Assistant for the Council, Laura Kretzler, who is staffing this meeting. I thank you very, very much, Laura, for doing that. And I welcome my fellow Northampton School Committee members and Superintendent Bonner and Business Administrator Bobby Jones. And I welcome my fellow trustees of Smith Vocational and Agricultural High School, Superintendent Lincoln Hoker, and School Business Administrator Crystal Fairman. So we'll get started soon, but first, Laura, will you please call the roll of those three elected bodies?
Sure. Starting with City Council, Councilor Davis.
Present.
Councilor Dubs.
Here.
Councilor Clemmer.
Here.
Councilor Loisel.
Here.
Councilor Maori.
Here.
Councilor Nabad.
She's there, but she can't unmute. She's under GLN. She doesn't have her name.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
Thank you.
I will find her. Hold on. GLM. Okay.
Councilor Nabad, are you able to respond?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Perry.
Here.
And Councilor Robbins. It's not all. And Councilor Stratton.
Here.
Okay, and moving on to school committee. Member Shara, Mayor Shara.
Present.
Okay, Member Bartoli.
Present.
Member Wiesenfround.
I'm here.
Member Montgomery Tamaclo.
Tamaclo here.
Tamaclo. Member Stein.
Present.
Member Martin.
Here.
Member Mahoney. Member Mahoney, I can come back.
No, present.
Okay. Member Reese, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing.
That's right. Here.
Okay. Member Jewell.
Present.
And Member Sainer Sullivan.
Here.
Okay, and then moving on to the Smith Vocational and Agricultural High School Board of Trustees. Member Kaylane.
I saw him. Oh, I see him. Hold on. He's there. He's, I think, working.
Okay, so we'll consider him present. Yes. Member Quadro.
He's sick this evening.
Thank you. Absent. Okay. Member Spencer Robinson.
Here.
And Dr. Bonner.
Here.
And of course, Mayor Shara also is an ex officio member. So Mayor Shara, you have a quorum of all three boards.
Thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're about to get started. Before I get started and focus in very locally, I just want to take a couple moments and acknowledge the utter horror that we are seeing in Minneapolis in the last week and for longer than that by the hands of our federal government. And I also want to take a moment to lift up the remarkable spirit and the amazing fight of the people of Minneapolis. You know, last year at this meeting, I noted that the first 10 days of the presidential administration had been stressful and anxious and disturbing. the rights and safety of our community members, as well as uncertainty around programs and resources, some of which people's lives actually depend on. What we have seen actually happen over this last year, and certainly over the last few weeks, has far exceeded my worst possible imaginings. It's incredibly hard to emotionally on all of us, of course, and concerns for our community and other communities. Just in terms of our task here before us, it's remarkably hard to project and make decisions in a time of such uncertainty. But as I reflect back, this has been the case for much of the last 6 years, whether it was because of the pandemic or because of the president. So this is sort of how we need to operate at the local level in the last bunch of years. I had the privilege of being at the State of the Commonwealth address last week at the State House. And I know I have not been able to look at what the governor has released today. I know she had a press conference. But I can say that there's no other state that I'd rather be doing this work in than Massachusetts, and how we have worked to protect many of our rights. And there's no city than ours that I'd want to be doing this work in. So I thank you very much for doing all of this for our community with me. Okay, so now let's get on with talking about the financial state of the city and what we can forecast about the FY27 budget. And Director Nardi is going to start the PowerPoint. Okay. I usually run my own PowerPoint, but I couldn't get it to download. So Director Nardi is going to do it. So excuse that I'll have to say next slide. Next slide, please. Director Nardi. Charlene? There you go. Okay. Okay, here's the agenda. What we're going to cover this evening. This is a slide document. So this presentation is a document that covers a lot of ground. It is very data intensive. And it is an actual document, not just a presentation, that is meant to be referred back to. It will be posted tomorrow on the city's website under the mayor's section, and then under budget for FY27, the upcoming fiscal year. Okay, next slide. So just going to go over the budget process a little bit. The budget process is governed by Mass General Law, Chapter 44 and Article 7 in the Northampton City Charter. MGL 44, Section 31 states that all Massachusetts municipalities are required by state law to prepare balanced annual budgets. And Section 32 dictates the requirements of the budget and its process for a city. This is different from the process for a town, but Northampton has been a city since 1884, so 142 years. By state statute, the mayor must submit to the city council her annual budget, which will include the amounts recommended for proposed expenditures of the city for the next fiscal year. It must be classified by department and must delineate ordinary maintenance, which also includes debt, and be subdivided by salaries and wages, which are personnel services or PS, and also have OOM or other than ordinary maintenance. The city charter, which was ratified by the people of Northampton in 2012, includes the Charter Acts of 2021 after the charter review, which happens every decade, and that review was in 2019, says that in Section 7-2 annual budget policy, it requires that, quote, the mayor shall hold a joint meeting of the city council and school committee and trustees of Smith Vocational Agricultural High School and the superintendents of both school districts before the commencement of the budget process to review the financial condition of the city, revenue and expenditure forecasts, and other relevant information prepared by the mayor in order to develop a coordinated budget, end quote. So that is what we are doing together this evening. Moving on to the budget process. This is an overview. The city runs on a fiscal year, which starts on July 1st and goes till June 30th. Finance Director Nardi and I work very closely with the city departments, some of which contain multiple divisions within them to review and create departmental budgets. And those budgets provide the city services which the people of Northampton rely on. They also honor contractual collective bargaining agreements. They account for mandated assessments and expenditure increases like insurance and state assessments that are outside of our control and our fixed costs. And they do it while working within the significant revenue constraints of Proposition 2.5. For the 2 districts in Northampton, the superintendents and the district business managers put together a budget by cost center, working with their schools and their departments. Those school budgets must be adopted by the school committee or trustees and submitted to the mayor 30 days before the mayor must submit a complete and balanced budget with the schools folded into it to the city council no later than 45 days before the start of the next fiscal year. And then the council must hold a public hearing and vote on the proposed budget within 45 days of receiving it. Okay, first we're going to talk about the city's revenue sources, how we bring in recurring funds to balance the expenses of the operations and services of the city. Next slide. This is a chart of revenue sources. This shows the sources of revenue by list on the right, and then the pie chart with the percent it contributes to our general fund in our current FY26 fiscal year. As you can see, the majority of our revenue comes from taxes at 67.36%, and the next largest source is state revenue at almost 14%, and then charges for services at about 12%, with the remaining sources at less than 2% each. Next slide. And then this is a breakdown of our tax revenue. So to dig in more into our largest source of revenue, again, which comprises 67.36% of our total revenue. So 92.8% of that tax revenue comes from real estate and personal property tax, both of which cannot be increased by more than 2.5% by state law. Personal property tax is largely based on non-real estate tangible assets of businesses. 6.7% of our tax revenue comes from excise taxes imposed on certain goods and services and activities, with motor vehicle excise being the largest portion at 3.72%. And local option excise taxes on meals, hotel, motel, which includes short-term rental, and adult use cannabis. These are all dependent on the market and financial climate. Then the last 0.5% comes from payments in lieu of taxes, known as pilots, which are payments made by tax-exempt entities to the city to compensate for lost tax revenue, and also interest on taxes and tax titles, and a tiny amount for boat excise. So this is a very wordy slide. These are term definitions as they relate to the tax levy. Again, please go back and read this, on your own time, and it's really to help you with the slide that follows it, but I'm going to kind of go through it quickly, and it is always available for you to refer back to. So starting off with Prop 2.5, Prop 2.5 sets the maximum limit a city can increase the property tax levy by each year to a 2.5% increase. And it was enacted in 1980 to place constraints on municipalities. The property tax levy is the amount the community can raise through real and personal property taxes. The levy can be any amount up to the maximum allowable levy. In Massachusetts, municipal revenues to support local spending for schools and all other public services are raised through the property tax levy, state aid, local receipts, and other sources, which we just went over. And again, the property tax levy is our largest source of revenue for most communities, and it certainly is for ours. Levy increases every fiscal year. The levy limit increases by 2.5% over the last year's automatic levy increase. This is done automatically by the Department of Revenue, and it added to that automatic increase is the addition of new growth in the tax base and any override that the community has voted that year. So that all gets added together to get the maximum allowable levy. And maximum allowable levy can be in a given year based on the previous year's levy plus, as I said, allowable new growth. It's calculated again by DOR, And so for FY26, the levy limit in Northampton is $81,293,602, and the city tax to $81,247,326. Excess levy capacity is the difference between the levy and the maximum allowable levy. We taxed to the max. In FY26, there is an excess levy of $46,275.85, which is the difference between the levy limit and what we taxed. That is because this is the remainder after the calculation of determining the tax rate to the nearest penny. We cannot add a full penny more to the rate, or it would go over the maximum allowable levy. So that is why there is a relatively small remainder. Levy ceiling is the absolute cap that the levy can be. The levy ceiling is determined by a calculation which is 2.5% of the full and fair cash value of all taxable real and personal property in the city. The FY26 levy ceiling is $148,586,917. New growth is the amount of increased value of new development from building, construction, property divisions that is not the result of a revaluation. The city assessors must submit new growth information for approval by DOR as part of the tax rate setting process. And then a Proposition 2.5 override is a vote by residents of the city or a community to permanently increase the levy limit base by the amount of the override question, allowing that municipality to tax more to that amount voted on by the people in that community. Levy ceiling changes. The total full and fair cash value of taxable real and personal property can change each year as properties are added or removed from the tax rolls and as market values increase or decrease. Okay, so moving on to this levy calculation slide again, which those definitions will help. So this slide shows how it works under the required Prop 2.5 structure. This orange column is the current fiscal year, FY26. So you can see that the calculation that gets us to that automatic levy increase with the base levy from 25, plus the 2.5 increase over that base levy, plus the addition of new growth. You see then we have a debt exclusion from the police station, and you get our max allowable levy. Again, we can't match that number exactly because that's the remainder of the calculation of determining the tax rate to the nearest penny, and adding more would put us over the maximum allowable levy. And so the change from last year that you see in the second to last column is the new tax revenue that can be used for the budget. Okay, moving on to state revenue. So the next piece of the revenue pie is from the state. State revenue to the city in this year comprises 13.8%. We are seeing a continual decrease in annual state revenue. It was 14% in FY25, 14.5 in 24, and 15 in 23. This state revenue includes Chapter 70 school aid, charter tuition reimbursement, unrestricted general government aid, affectionately known as UGA, payments in lieu of taxes for state-owned land, reimbursements for veteran benefits, abatements to seniors, offsets or pass-throughs for incoming school choice and public libraries, and a few other intergovernmental state revenues, and the Massachusetts Ambulance CPE, which is Medicaid reimbursement received as applied for by the fire rescue EMTs. In the fall of, in this past fall, the Mass Municipal Association came out with a report titled Navigating the Storm, Charting a Course Towards Fiscal Stability, which analyzed how the cities and towns in the Commonwealth are being pushed to what, as they characterize, our breaking points in our budgets. And we're hitting fiscal cliffs with increased costs for services we provide to our communities and decreased state aid. We talk about Chapter 70 here a lot in Northampton, and we'll later on, but to focus in on UGA for a moment, the MMA report found that unrestricted general government aid was slashed in the Great Recession, and 18 years after those reductions, UGA is just getting back to the FY 2008 levels in this current fiscal year state budget. So not adjusting for inflation, just actually the amount from 2008. We have some slides later on that show how our government aid, how our state aid is stagnant and has not been keeping up with inflation, while our assessments that we are required to pay to the state have increased. So I would say that it is certainly our experience here in Northampton, and we feel it acutely, that while our needs and our costs and our budget are increasing, our state aid is not even keeping pace at its low percentage, but actually decreasing. Okay, next slide, please. Charges for services. The third largest source of our revenue at 11.88%. This includes parking revenues and departmental fees from programs such as the Recreation Department or services from the city clerk, like dog licenses and vital records fees, or collector. It also includes the revenue from inspections done by the health, building, and fire departments. Parking revenues, in addition to supporting the general fund, are also used to support the operations and maintenance of the parking system. So not all of this goes into the general fund. And while this is the third largest revenue source, it must be noted that the tuition for Smith Vocational Agricultural High School that comes in from sending communities is for the operating budget of the school, and it is a pass-through. So while it is in here as part of the revenue, it's a direct pass-through to Smith Voc in the largest part of this piece of the pie. Okay, moving on to miscellaneous revenue, which all together come out to about 1.9%. This includes the PVTA 5 college reimbursement, which is a reimbursement the city gets from PVTA for the bus's operation in the city. It includes interest on investments and shared services we provide to other communities and get reimbursed for, such as veteran services, regional assessments. We provide and are reimbursed for veteran services to 14 other communities. And we also host Laserfiche scanned documents on our servers for the towns of Chesterfield, Goshen, Hadley, Southampton, Westhampton, and Williamsburg, and are reimbursed for that. And the city's sealer of weights and measures provides regional services for which we collect fees. You may notice if you go to any anything that needs to be certified by the sealer in this broad area, it will be signed by John Fry, who is the city sealer of weight and measures, and we provide that service for a good part of Western Mass. Moving on to slide 13. These are interfund operating transfers and reserves and gifts. So these two little pieces are both of those. So interfund operating transfers are 1.68% of revenues, and that includes the indirect costs from the Community Preservation Act funds, and mostly is for the city's 4 enterprise funds, so water, sewer, solid waste, stormwater, and flood control. So the indirects for those. They are by specific percentages and include such things as covering a portion of the cost of employee health and life insurance, workers' comp, and unemployment costs, Medicare, general property and liability, and a percentage of the general government departmental budgets that relate to those funds, like the auditors and the treasurer collector. Just a little bit on CPA. So CPA funds are collected at 3% of tax levy of real property on the amount above $100,000. So the first $100,000 is exempt from CPA. And the Community Preservation Committee is comprised of representative members of the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, Historic Commission, Parks and Rec Commission, Housing Authority, as well as 2 at-large elected members and 2 appointed members who are responsible for holding public meetings and receiving applications and making recommendations to the City Council which is responsible for voting on how Community Preservation Act funds are spent in the 4 CPA program areas, which are community housing, historic preservation, open space, and recreation. Reserves and gifts, that little smaller piece. With the additions to the budget in the last fiscal year, we are now showing this part of the budget or this part of revenues that is supporting the general fund. And that is coming from the $500,000 Smith gift that is being directed to the Northampton Public Schools over 3 years. And the addition of the Special Education Stabilization Fund transfer and the money that is coming out of the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund to support the budget. So in this last year, that was $1.4 million. So all told, that comes out to 1.49% of our revenues. Okay, next slide, please. Licenses and permits. So we've got 3 small pieces that we're combining into this one slide. License and permits includes fees for liquor licenses, departmental permits from the city clerk, health department, fire department, building department, and are about 1.1% of revenue. Fines and forfeits are 0.6%, include motor vehicle infractions, reimbursements from the RMV, and parking fines. And last, federal revenue makes up a teeny portion of our revenue and is dropping. It is 0.14%, down from 0.15% last year. These are reimbursements for students eligible for Medicaid reimbursements for services. And of course, this is in danger of being eliminated entirely. This is different from federal grants that we get, which are not part of the general fund, but we will touch on that later. Expenditures. Let's move from revenues onto expenditures. Excuse me. Next slide. Okay, so this is an overview of our FY26 budgeted expenses. Education is, as always, the biggest portion of our expenses at 43%. And in FY26, it's budgeted at $55,946,000. Which is up from 52.5 million in FY25. The next biggest expense for the general fund is for employee benefits at 20% of our budget. Health insurance and retirement is what it's comprised of. And that is almost 26 million, which is up from 24.4 million last year. Then departmental expenditures are throughout here, grouped in their state dictated categories that contain the departments under them. So public safety being the largest budget category, which includes fire rescue, police, dispatch, and the building department at 13.11%. Then general government at 6.2%, which includes 12 city departments, and then down through the smaller city departmental categories. You see debt service is our 5th largest expense at $5 million, with repayment based on the amortization schedule for bond issues. This is an important point because people have sort of talked about debt and sort of queried whether we should be taking on more debt. You know, debt service is paid from the general fund. So if you increase that, you decrease the amount of available general fund revenue for schools and other city services. Next, we have state assessments and charges. And these are from the cherry sheet, which is the notification from the Commissioner of Revenue of the upcoming fiscal year state aid and also the assessments that are being charged to the city from the state. Charges include air pollution assessment in all municipalities for a portion of the costs incurred by the DEP, RMV non-renewal surcharge to municipalities to reimburse RMV for marking a license or registration for non-renewal, a regional transit assessment for PVTA, a special education assessment that doesn't come from the school budget, and the charter school and school choice sending tuition expenses to the general fund that do not come out of the school budget and also don't count towards net school spending. Then we have insurance and reserves, our general liability, property and auto, public employee liability insurance, maintenance, and are different from health insurance, which is under that employee's benefits. Second line there. The non-appropriated uses and offsets are an overlay reserve for abatements, which includes senior and veterans work-off program, and cherry sheet offsets for public libraries and incoming school choice. These are pass-through expenses that go to the library and to the schools, and the city doesn't keep that revenue. So expenditure totals or percentages for each of these categories are here, but they don't tell the full story of expenditures per category. Those are the direct expenses. That second largest slice for employee benefits is divided into all of the other pieces that are departmental categories. So education, public safety, general government, public works, health and human services, and culture and recreation. And then on the next slide, you see that. So incorporating those indirect expenses and fixed costs in education and the city departments. Education expenditures for both MPS and Smith Folk account for 56.51% of the general fund expenses. City department expenditures for all other departments are 39.64 of the general fund, and then debt service, which includes both city and school facilities, is 3.86%. So that's incorporating all those indirect costs to the fixed costs. Okay. Now we'll move on to comparisons of key financial indicators. And we use, so we look at a few different financial indicators, and we compare ourselves to 11 other benchmark communities in our region to see how we're stacking up to other municipalities in Western Mass in terms of some of these main revenue generators. These communities, benchmark communities, have been used by the city for well over a decade. And you'll see, well, if you go back and look at these presentations, you'll see that where we fall and where the communities fall do change over time. So reviewing these annually gives us a snapshot of what's happening around us and how we rank in comparison. So first up is residential tax rate. Our residential tax rate is $13.67 per $1,000 of valuation. This is down from $13.93 last year and $15.19 per thousand evaluation 2 years ago. So Northampton has the third lowest tax rate of the group for residential. Longmeadow had been the highest for as long as I could remember, and also had the highest tax rate in the Commonwealth. But it seems that their neighbor, East Longmeadow, has surpassed them this year. The principal assessor makes a presentation to the city council annually for the council's tax classification hearing when the council sets the tax classification and determines the distribution of taxes among the property classes. So this happened on November 6th, 2025. And if you go to the next slide, this is commercial tax rate. That classification that's the council sets did set this year and has in the past set it for a single tax rate, also known as a factor of 1, which means that we have the same tax rate for our residential as we do for our commercial properties. And this is recommended for our community because of our balance of residential to commercial property and other factors. And by keeping a factor of 1, it helps us to attract businesses. So we also have the third lowest commercial tax rate in this group. These 5 highest commercial tax rate communities are all communities that have a split rate, meaning that their residential and their commercial tax rates are different. So their commercial tax rates are higher than their residential tax rates. Okay, but despite having the third lowest tax rate among this cohort, we have high home values, and they have grown quite a bit in the last few years. You know, the demand to live in Northampton and the market impact has continued to increase values. So while our tax rate has gone down, our values have gone up, and we have the second highest home value in this group, second to just Amherst. As you can see in these last 4 years that are here, values also have increased in all of our comparison communities. Housing inventory in Massachusetts remains very, very tight with very high demand. So overall in the Commonwealth, property prices have increased by over 50% since the start of the pandemic in early 2020. And nationally, over the past decade, which included recovery from both the Great Recession and the pandemic, U.S. home values have grown by more than 100%. So, we certainly are experiencing it here in Northampton. It's happening everywhere in the Commonwealth, and you can see here kind of the kind of consistent increase in all of these communities, and some places where there have been kind of like jumps, and ours has been fairly consistent. Okay, moving on. So our strong property values are also reflected in the average single family tax bill, which is calculated by taking the average value multiplied by the rate. So as you can see, we are ranked higher within the group because of our higher home values, but are significantly under Longmeadow and Amherst. And now East Longmeadow is has a higher average tax bill than we do. So again, even though our tax rate is lower than all but East Hampton and South Hadley, our valuation is higher. And of course, although we have this low tax rate, our residents are really feeling the effect of our high property values. This is where I always make a plug and I ask all of you, and especially the city councilors who would most likely to hear from constituents about this. But, when you hear from your constituents who are struggling with these increased values due to the market, please tell them that that the city has some options for those who are older and have less income. So if they qualify, they should take advantage of those. So I urge everyone to contact the assessor's office to discuss possible tax relief options. If you want to sort of get more information or look at what the qualifying factors are, visit the Office of the Assessor's page on the city website and look under personnel statutory exemptions in the left-hand column, which has the deferrals and the exemptions and the abatements that we are allowed to offer by the Commonwealth. Excuse me. There's also the senior and veteran tax work-off programs, which we have more than doubled the amount of slots available in the last few years. That program has provided opportunities for older adults and veterans to help in schools as trail and bike path stewards, in the book shed, at the transfer station, in the senior center, at the libraries, and with collecting economic development data. And that's just to name just a few of the opportunities that this program has matched the skills and the interests of seniors and veterans with departments that need assistance to then provide tax relief. So, excuse me, you can find info about those programs under senior services and veteran services. And of course, you can always call the mayor's office and we are happy to connect you with the right people to talk about different options. Okay, slide 24, please. Average single family tax bill from FY 23 to 26. Here you can see the growth in the tax bills over the last 4 years in our comparison communities in Northampton. Northampton obviously, has that yellow arrow. Generally steady increases across the board with some occasional jumps. So everyone's tax bills are increasing and pretty steadily. Okay. Next is total new growth. So our continued and fairly consistent strong new growth shows that people are interested in investing in Northampton. Again, our new growth value is added to our levy increase. So you can see, this just shows you 2 years, but you may see some jumps in communities like Amherst and West Springfield, where they've had big projects and then it drops down. And as you'll see in the next section, we have fairly reliable new growth that we'll talk about. Okay, slide. So moving on to revenue trends. So we'll review the trends we're seeing and how we make responsible projections in a fairly chaotic world. These are for the sources that are not real and personal property, which again has a fixed 2.5% increase. So these are revenue categories as a percentage of the city's operating budget. This is just a quick look at those main revenue categories over the last 10 years. You can see that taxes, so that is that sort of tall, dark green bar, remains fairly consistent, but increased as a percentage, fairly consistent, but has, has kind of increased and decreased as the percentage of state aid, which is that second bar, has been consistently decreasing. Local revenues are increasing as a percentage of the budget. And then that miscellaneous revenue, which is that last kind of bright green chartreuse bar, had been basically imperceptible in those earlier years, but has increased with our increase in interest income. And both local and miscellaneous revenues have been pushed significantly to use more revenue in the budget. So you're seeing an increase there. Okay, slide 28. Back to talking about new growth. As I mentioned before, our new growth is, from new construction, land subdivisions, condominium conversions, and property renovations. And it is a reflection of investments and growth within the community. And we have been seeing generally strong growth for the past quite a few years. Ongoing projects can't be counted twice. So even if they span years, it can only be counted in 1 year. So as you see, new growth does fluctuate, and we have to be careful not to overestimate it. But we have been really fortunate to be in having more consistent new growth than many communities, which if you remember that slide 2 ago, they would often have spikes. We have a much more consistent new growth in Northampton, which is a fantastic thing. Okay, local option cannabis. So this represents the 3% cannabis excise tax that we receive from the state on a quarterly basis. We began collecting excise in the last 2 quarters of FY19. You may remember we were the first community to start that. The following year, FY20, was our highest year at 1.64 million collected. Then FY21 was down a bit to 1.38 million, and FY22 continued the downward trend at 1.15 million. And then in FY23, you see we dropped under a million to 846,000. In FY24, for the first time since 2020, we saw an increase as it went back up to $944,000. For most of FY25, it continued that upward trajectory and ended at a total of 1.13 million. But the fourth quarter of FY25 was lower than the fourth quarter of FY24. And the first 2 quarters of this fiscal year, 26, are lower than those quarters, the first 2 quarters in FY25. So this blue line shows what has been budgeted for cannabis. You can see in FY23, we did not meet our budgeted projections, and that line was short. We then decreased those revenue projections to not be short again, but it rebounded a bit. And we have pushed our revenue projections for FY26 by $163,000 to get more revenue into the operating budget. But as I've said, the last 3 quarters have been lower than their previous year's quarters. So we will see if we meet what our projection is for this year. Everyone really likes to talk about the cannabis revenue, but I think this really illustrates that this is still a very, very new and unstable market, and it makes it very challenging to be able to predict revenue. Okay. Next is hotel motel. This shows it since 2015. You can clearly see in FY21 the effect of the pandemic when these revenues plummeted. in FY22, it made truly a remarkable comeback. It has continued to do well. You know, the uncertainty of the pandemic made it really hard to project for the next years, but we have been pushing these revenues more and more. So you can see, you know, when it plummeted in 21, 22, it was hard to predict that it was going to rebound that much. So again, if you look where we are, where we have budgeted for FY26, we have pushed those revenues quite a bit and have been continuing to add more and more to them. Moving on to 31 and meals. Again, since 2015, meals also took a hit in 2020 and 21, though not as dramatic as hotel motel, and also rebounded well. And we are also pushing these revenues higher again for this fiscal year. And, you know, I always want to take a moment and really thank the city's economic development team after I talk about these slides, as well as the arts and culture department and our collaboration with the DNA and the chamber and the businesses. And also thank the city council for their support around the economic development efforts that we have been making over the last few years with increased outdoor dining and programming, providing entertainment, and more community space downtown. Also for support around events like the Taste of Northampton, which was brought back 4 years ago after an 18-year hiatus, thanks to a regional economic development grant that my office applied for. And then the DNA has been organizing it with financial assistance from an ARPA community grant that the city gave them. And also lots of in-kind support from city departments. So, you know, we have been working very hard on economic development ideas and just finding ways to bring people downtown and help us continue to recover from the pandemic, but also just sort of surpass it in some ways, we hope. So all of these economic development efforts have really, I think, helped these revenues not just recover, but be stronger, which has been the goal. So shout out to all of those folks who have worked really hard on that. Okay, moving on to parking. Parking revenue is collected monthly directly by the city. And this has been an area that's been slower to rebound post-pandemic. You see the dip. And, you know, likely that's partly at least because of the switch to remote work that kind of stuck. Many people have enjoyed working at home and are continuing to do so. But it has been ticking back up. And we also made parking changes in 2023 that have successfully encouraged more folks to use the garage. And we know this from an increase in counts there. And parking on Main Street has been turning over more in the evening, which has helped businesses, which is their request. And also shifting the times for parking enforcement actually captures more when people are parking as opposed to times when spots were just empty. So that is parking revenue. Motor vehicle excise, which is so interesting to me. So this shows motor vehicle excise tax for the last 12 years. We saw an unexpected increase in this in FY24, which continued into FY25. There were definitely some market indicators that people were trying to buy cars, particularly, you know, last year before. I can't really explain 24, but 25 buy cars before tariffs hit the market. So that may explain why it was strong last year. You know, we don't know how it's going to shake out this year. The bulk of these bills are billed in February, and we won't really know yet what this looks like until much later in the year. But again, this sort of highlights the weird unpredictability of some revenues and outside forces on them. Okay, ambulance revenue. We've seen this generally grow, but a bit unpredictably at times. We have seen very strong growth in the last few years, but it's hard to know where the ceiling is going to be for ambulance revenue. We've also really pushed this revenue significantly this year. Okay, inspections and permits. Here we see that they have been recovering after supply chain and construction costs saw a dip in FY22. FY24 and 25 were high thanks to inspection fees for Smith College's geothermal project. So that really helped the last 2 years. It's hard to know where it's going to be for this fiscal year because a lot of these permits get pulled in the spring. So we're not able, you can see we've pushed this revenue quite a bit. That gray line is the budgeted revenue. So we will see how we end up this year. Okay, investment income. This slide shows our investment income since 2007. We've talked a lot about this in the last year or so. You can see how the amount of investment income we earned has fluctuated with interest rates, as we've talked about many times. And prior to the fiscal stability plan, our reserves were extremely low. So there was less to earn interest on. Before FY23, the 10-year annual average was about $200,000 a year. Then in FY23, the city's treasurer identified and moved us into an investment vehicle tied to an increase in interest rates called a SOFR account. This coincided with the account also having unprecedented one-time federal American Rescue Plan Act funds in it, which greatly increased the balance earning interest. And that lighter green that you see from 22 on is the interest that is coming from ARPA. And as you see, it's also decreasing. You know, ARPA needs to be completed by the end of this year. So another thing to note is the Federal Reserve has cut interest rates 6 times since September 2024. And although they did hold them yesterday, and the interest rate in that SOFR account has dropped from 4.92% in 2024 to 3.73% now. So while we expect to continue to receive more investment income from previous years because we're in this SOFR account, we cannot assume that it'll remain at the historic high. It's a really highly volatile revenue source to rely on for recurring revenue. But we have added $1.9 million of revenue to the current year's budget, FY26 budget, from this source to support increases in the Northampton Public Schools and fire rescue. And we'll be pushing it a bit more in the next year. Okay. This is a history of state aid, which doesn't include these offsets for school choice and library funds. To get back a bit on my soapbox about state aid, this shows how state revenue as a percent of our budget for the last 12 years. And in FY15, you can see that it was 15.11% and has dropped to 12.58% this fiscal year. So this includes all state aid, Chapter 70 school aid being the largest portion of that. And this is revenue only. So you can see that drop that's happened in 12 years. Next slide shows you 25 years of net state aid. So this is revenue minus the expenses. So many of you have seen me talk about this chart many times. It shows the state aid and assessments for the last 25 years. It excludes the offsets, again, which goes directly to schools and to libraries. So our state revenue is in green. It dips down and up a bit, but not a lot of growth in 25 years. You can see in FY 2002, it was $14 million. And this year is 16.4 million. So it seems like there's growth there. But then if you look at that blue bar down below, those are our assessments. So the state expenses that we pay to the state. So in 02, that blue bar represents $464,000. If you go to FY26, it has grown to this year being $4.5 million. So any increases that we've seen in state aid have been matched or really eclipsed by our assessments. And these are actual dollars, not adjusted for inflation. So while all of our everything's increased, required net school spending, charter sending, all city expenses, all school expenses, and certainly needs have increased. We are getting significantly less of our state tax dollars than we did 25 years ago. And we actual less dollars and less for our dollars because they've remained stagnant. And so, as the Mass Municipal Association highlighted, it also means that there's increasingly more pressure on municipalities to make up the difference. And with growing deficits, many communities are facing cuts across Massachusetts, as I'm sure you've been seeing in sort of this cascading news that I see from locally, but across the state of different communities who are having huge budget deficits. We received the governor's budget last week with a cherry sheet, so we will get to projections and we'll talk about what we're expecting from state aid this year, but it ain't good. Okay, slide 39. We'll move on to expenditure trends for fixed and departmental costs. Hold on, I need to pour some more water. I can reach it. And this is information on debt service. So bonds are those expenditures that are financed through borrowing. And they require payment of principal and interest for a term of 5 to 20 years, depending on the life of the project. These payments come from the general fund operating budget and are referred to as debt service. These payments use recurring revenue from general fund and also CPA funds for CPA projects that are funded through borrowing. So bonding is generally used for major expenditures, and the city works to have a balance of capital that is funded by cash and borrowing. The debt schedule is carefully planned to maximize our opportunities for larger capital projects to be funded in a timely manner without causing large spikes in debt service payments, which would impact the operating budget. We also take into account interest rates and economic conditions and the ability to support projects through reserves first before bonding and incurring added interest costs to a project. So the net general fund debt service as a percent of the budget is at 3.9% in this fiscal year. And this slide shows the city's debt service since 2015. The principal is the dark blue, interest is the light blue. As you can see, in the beginning of the pandemic in FY21, it dropped because the city didn't bond in FY20. So there was no increase in FY21. During this time period, we have been relying more on reserves and the infusion of restricted ARPA funds. And we will continue to assess projects as they're identified to see if they meet the qualifications for debt service. But again, debt service is paid from the general fund. So recurring revenue used for principal and interest on debt service is less recurring revenue available for school and city services. Next is employee health insurance. So it is 12% of our FY26 budget at $15,590,671, which is an increase that you can see there over FY25. In addition to being our second highest expenditure after schools, what the insurance change per year will be is always one of our biggest unknowns and largest causes of anxiety, I would say. Premiums aren't set until the end of February or early March. I'm sure you've been hearing, we use the Group Insurance Commission, GIC. You've probably been hearing about double-digit increases for communities that are in the Hampshire County Government Insurance Trust. We have not seen increases as large as they have, thankfully. But it still is always one of our largest increases and is the second largest part of our budget. Okay, retirement and OPEB. All City of Northampton employees, excluding licensed school staff who are part of a state system, participate in the Northampton Retirement Board contributory retirement system. Prior to 1988, there were no regulations for retirement contributions, and municipalities just contributed on a pay-as-you-go basis. But in 1988, the law changed and required that we not only pay for the current retirees, but put away and fund for future retirements. All retirement plans must be fully funded by June 30th, 2040. We are at 75.1% of funding of this. So this is a huge liability that municipalities have been working to meet across the Commonwealth. As long as the return assumption is met, our system is targeted to be fully funded by fiscal year 2037, so before the 2040 deadline. Other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, are general health and life insurance for retirees. This is a future liability for the city. And while not yet specifically required by the state to be funded, it's important for the city to make yearly progress towards fully funding this liability. It should be noted that we have reduced our contribution to OPEB in FY24 and FY26. This is one of the reductions that was made to direct more funds to the public schools. Okay, other insurances are workers' comp, general liability, auto insurance, fire and police, workers' comp, which is different, and property insurance. All you can see there on this bar chart. And as you can see, they all generally go up every year. Okay. Next is education spending. So on to our most talked about topic, education expenditures. This slide shows the budget for our 2 districts since 2012. You can see that, of course, the expenditures for education grow steadily, and then you can see that we've had larger increases in the last few years. Next slide is shows that MPS has increased 32%. So this shows the amount increases over the last 4 years for MPS, which equals a 32% increase in this time period. And now this slide is total education spending for the 2 districts, including the expenditures that support the schools and staff, but for which the schools don't budget or account for. They are fully paid out of the city operating budget. So this includes employee benefits, which includes a Medicare contribution for all school employees, health insurance for all school employees that take the city health insurance, and retirement funding for non-certified staff such as paraprofessionals, school clerical, the school custodial staff, and school cafeteria staff. So this equals about $10.2 million for MPS and $2.1 million for Smith Vocational. Also included in this are insurance for all school buildings and vehicles, shared city services such as human resources, central services, and information technology and Parks and Rec. Capital planning projects, only individual capital projects below $150,000 count towards net school spending. And net charter school tuition. So sending tuition for charter schools minus the state reimbursement. And the reimbursement is a step down reimbursement for the first 3 years that a student is in a charter school. And then there is no reimbursement after the 3rd year for students that remain in a charter school after the 3rd year. So that is that net is 2.57 million in FY26. And then school choice sending tuition for residents who choose to send their student to another district's public school, and that's $656,637. So for the current for the current year, the estimated education spending outside of the school budget is about $15 million for MPS, which added to the line item budget for MPS comes to a total of $59.19 million. And for Smith Folk, the additional $3,155,000 brings the total to $14.95 million. But again, a large portion of the Smith Folk budget comes from sending tuition from students outside of Northampton. So we are required by DESE, which is the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, to include direct and indirect expenditures to calculate net school spending. This is how DESE measures a district's education spending by net school spending, which includes these indirects. Some of these listed here are part of the calculation for net school spending, but some of the very large amounts are not part of DESE's calculation into actual net school spending, such as charter and school choice sending tuition and any capital projects over 150,000. Okay, slide 48. This is the impact of charter and school choice sending tuition on the budget, both of which are significant and growing net losses for the city. It's isolating these two big expenditures, which don't count towards net school spending, but have a massive effect on the budget. In this current fiscal year, we're continuing to see this increase to now 3.22 million coming out of the general fund. School choice in tuition goes to MPS for their use as a reserve fund, but school choice out and charter out is not taken out of the school budget. That budget is held harmless for those large assessments, and it comes out of the general fund. Okay. Next is Chapter 70 as a percent of net school spending. Here's a comparison of the percent of net school spending contributed by the state in each community with Chapter 70 funds. So again, this is how DESE compares districts, and it's their formula that determines required net school spending, which is the annual minimum they determine must be spent on schools by a community. So as you can see, other than Longmeadow at 15%, I'm sorry, this is at 21%. Northampton and Smith Folk receive less Chapter 70 funds than the other communities. This has been an issue for a very long time in Northampton. You've probably heard me talk about it a lot. Some communities, as you can see, all of these other communities, a much larger percent of their budget is covered by state aid than Northampton. We are what's called a minimum aid community, and we're limited by some formula factors in the amount of Chapter 70 funds that we get, while it also means that we are held harmless for decreasing enrollment. So we don't get less Chapter 70 funds for less enrollment, but we have had very limited increases in Chapter 70 for many years. Okay, next slide. So this is actually a DESE slide. It's their district profile for Northampton Public Schools, which shows, again, that flat line of red for Chapter 70. So those red bars at the bottom are our Chapter 70 state aid. Blue is the foundation budget, which is the per student formula DESE uses to determine required net school spending. And then that dash, which is the dash blue, the dash kind of tan line is a required net school spending. And then the solid tannish line is our actual net school spending. So the delta between the dash and the solid line is the amount over the requirement that Northampton is expending. And again, that doesn't include some expenditures like capital projects over 150,000 or charter and school choice sending tuition. But you can see that, again, our state aid has stayed fairly stagnant while everything else has increased, particularly our actual net school spending. Okay, and then this is for Smith Folk. It's a bit of a different story, again, because most of their budget comes from sending tuition for non-Northampton students. And then required net school spending compared to our actual net school spending in just another way. So this is if you look at the bars, you see that the required net school spending in red compared to actual school spending for MPS on this chart for the last 10 fiscal years. And then on the right, these are the actual dollar amounts expended over net school spending required by DESE, with big jumps in the last 3 years. And then here's the slide for Smith Folk. And with the fluctuations being, again, because only about 20% of their students are Northampton students. So we tend to be much closer to net school spending for the operational budget, and the amounts above generally are come from capital, which fluctuate depending on their needs. And the remaining budget, again, comes from sending communities on a per student basis. Okay, moving on to reserves and to free cash. This is something that we've spoken about quite a bit in this last year. Next slide. Reserves are different from revenues. But they're a critical part of our municipal financial picture. As reserves are not guaranteed to be replenished and take years to build, we generally use them for one-time expenses or emergency situations, as you can't rely on them for ongoing recurring expenses, especially compounding expenses like salaries. If they're used in the operating budget, they must be done in a planned way with a clear understanding of the impact. And that is the purpose of the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund, which we have used for the last 3 years. Used for the last 2 years for the Northampton Public Schools budget, and then this last year for the NPS budget, and also to make additions to fire rescue. So maintaining reserves leaves Northampton better positioned to deal with funding issues in difficult times, and it gives us the tools to provide continuity of services. And they provide critical financial stability for emergencies such as weather-related disasters, such as flooding, excess snow and ice, hurricanes. You know, in 2023, we had multiple historic flooding events. In 2024, we experienced a long drought and a wildfire. And then just this week, the storm that we had is going to put us over our snow and ice budget, and we will need reserves to cover that. So it also helps for failure of major infrastructure, such as a building boiler or a structural issue in a building or other unforeseen expenses. We have a capital plan, and we work to maintain buildings and our equipment and infrastructure, and to be able to anticipate when something might need to be replaced and plan on how to fund it. But we also have decades of deferred maintenance and unanticipated things that happen, especially as we're experiencing more and more climate events. Reserves also provide stability for revenue volatility due to big events like a pandemic, regional or national economic downturns, significant change or closure of a tax-producing industry, or changes in state revenues, and not something that we've really worried much about in the past, but now think about a lot, a change in federal funding or federal grants being stripped away. So this is another reason why it's important when creating a budget at any level to be cautious and not overestimating fluctuating revenues. There are things outside of our control that can have an effect on our budget and maintain our ability to maintain our services. Financial reserves are also important because they provide operational stability by funding the capital improvement program that I talked about, and which reduces repair costs and improves operational efficiency. It maintains infrastructure, helps maintain the city's AAA bond rating that comes from Standard & Poor's, which results in lower borrowing costs for necessary capital improvements, which saves hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money and interest, and then allows us to do more with our capital funds. And again, provide planned contributions to the operating budget from the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund to extend periods of financial stability in keeping with the city's fiscal stability plan. And maintaining reserves better positions Northampton to deal with funding issues in difficult times and gives us the tools to provide, again, our continuity of the services that the people of Northampton rely on. So next slide. So we've gone over this a bunch in the last couple of months. These are general fund reserves and free cash, and their uses and current balances as of 12/31/25. These funds can only be used with 2/3 vote by the city council. So there's free cash for any one-time use or to build reserves or to fund capital. There's the general fund stabilization fund for emergency or unforeseen costs. It's the city's primary reserve fund and can be used to support projects not identified in the capital plan, but that have arisen due to unforeseen or emergency circumstances, cover snow and ice in a bad winter, or to supplement the operating budget in the case of a sharp, unanticipated revenue decline, such as state aid reductions or perhaps federal. Then there's the general fund capital stabilization fund, which is used for the funding of capital improvements identified in the 5-year capital plan approved annually by the council. The general fund fiscal stability stabilization fund, which is intended for operating budget stabilization. This is the fund established in FY 2014 with the fiscal stability plan, and is designed to be funded by the amount of a Prop 2.5 override and any additional appropriation from free cash annually. and then used carefully between renewing the plan with another override for operating. And there's the Climate Change Mitigation Stabilization Fund, which is intended to support climate emergencies, climate mitigation, and our progress towards our carbon neutrality goals. This stabilization fund was created using one-time ARPA loss revenue. One of the purposes of this fund is in line with the Climate Action and Project Administration Department to plan for costs to implement our climate resilience and regeneration plans, including using it for design and strategic planning and to work towards our decarbonization goals. But it's also been really important to have some designated funds that gives us the flexibility and positions us well to be able to take advantage of and leverage state and or federal grants. And you saw us use this most recently for the high school geothermal project. And then there's a Special Education Stabilization Fund, which is to fund unforeseen and unbudgeted costs associated with special education at the Northampton Public Schools. $350,000 from it has been used in FY26 for the school budget. And there's currently an order before the council to replenish it using the Medicare reimbursement funds and tailings from the FY25 Northampton Public Schools budget. Okay. Free cash. So this shows it from since 2015. And as you can see, it's been higher since the pandemic. So free cash is certified each year by the Department of Revenue after the books from the previous fiscal year are closed. And it's made up of any revenues that come in above projections, unused departmental budgets due to vacancies or retirements, and what has been carried over from the prior year. So the Division of Local Services, which is a division of the Department of Revenue's latest best practice recommendation is that a municipality have a free cash balance each year that is 5 to 7%. Sorry, there's a truck outside of the general fund operating budget. But as we have needed to direct more revenue to the budget for schools, we are not able at this time to change what our policy has been to match DOR's best practice, and we're remaining with our 3 to 5% policy. You can see that free cash is significantly less this year, and we project it will be less next year because we have pushed our revenue projections. So that red part of the bar are the ARPA funds that significantly added to free cash for a period of time. So according to our policy, based on, again, DOR best practice, once certified by DOR, free cash is used to contribute to stabilization funds to fund capital improvements, which are one-time larger expenditures, and also 3 for one-time uses. So again, the certification for those 3 years included those ARPA loss revenue funds, which were part of the city's ARPA allocation, accounting for revenue loss during the pandemic. So next slide. And as I just said, Northampton, like municipalities all across the nation, had higher free cash since the pandemic because of that huge release of federal funds to cities and towns, which also happened in conjunction with reduced spending during the pandemic when projects weren't happening, and cautious budgeting because of the uncertainty of the financial situation in the pandemic. Additionally, there was a loss of workforce that was experienced from the pandemic, resulting in turnbacks from vacancies, and then strong rebounding of revenues in FY23 after they had tanked in 22. So communities, when they were budgeting for 23, were being more cautious because they had seen a huge decrease in revenue in the year before. And so that resulted in more free cash, which is then sort of carried over for communities for a few years. Okay. This is a DOR chart that shows Northampton's free cash as a percentage of our operating budget. So you can see that it was higher because of the factors I just talked about, and is now below 5%, which again is the low end of their recommendation. So we are below the low end of the recommendation for this current fiscal year. Okay, contribution to growth and reserves. In FY 2012, we were down to almost no reserves. We had $249,000 in general stabilization and about $4,000 in capital stabilization. In 2013, the city began to rebuild them, and thanks to implementing recommended financial policies from the Government Finance Officers Association, Mass DOR, and the Financial Management Association, as well as Standard & Poor and our city charter. So we pulled together financial policies using all of those different recommendations. And with the creation of the fiscal stability plan to stabilize school and general fund and operations, we were able to then start to rebuild those reserves. So you'll see it took years to rebuild them by this careful use of one-time funds for non-recurring costs and careful budgeting practices. So as I said, there's been a lot of growth in the last few years because of one-time federal pandemic relief funds, which have now ended. But they were used to support mitigation activities during the pandemic and also saved city funds during that time and increased reserves. So next, you'll see the reserve history. This is from 2010. And you see there in 2012 what I was talking about, where it was down to $249,000 in general, and you can't even register capital because it's $4,000. And this happened after that period of economic downturn. So you see what I've just sort of talked about, how we've grown those reserves over time. And then the impact of the pandemic grew them even more. Okay. Next slide is our general stabilization balance as a percent of the budget. So this is in comparison to our other comparative communities. The reason this is FY24 is because that is the latest data for some of these communities, but it shows that we are, for our general stabilization, we're at sort of the lower end of this group. And then if you go to the next slide, this is our total stabilization as percent of the budget, excluding the enterprise stabilization funds. So, there's been a DOR chart that's been talked about, which includes the enterprise stabilization funds, but not all communities have enterprise stabilization funds. And those funds are restricted to use just within their respective utilities. So that chart misrepresents our general fund stabilization reserves as a percent of the budget. This shows our total, excluding those enterprises, and compared to other communities. So we are, not as high as East Hampton or Amherst, but have more reserves than some of the other communities as percent of our budget. Okay, this is a little bit deeper on the fiscal stability plan and the stability stabilization fund and how we plan for the future and increasing costs. Next slide. So established in 2014, the plan is designed to be funded by the amount of a Prop 2.5 override and any additional appropriation from free cash annually. The Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund was created to delay the necessity of requiring another general fund override to balance the annual operating budget and to maintain stability of the city's essential operations from year to year as annual operating expenses and assessments grow more than 2.5% each year. So if it's necessary to draw down from the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund, the funds must be used to maintain essential city services and schools and must be done carefully to ensure time between overrides. Every year, the budget increases if our services are to be maintained. And this is a reality because in addition to whatever rising costs and inflation we're experiencing, most of our revenue, as we've talked about, is limited to 2.5% growth. But most of our operating budget is for personnel. And every year there are contractual salary increases with automatic step increases and percentage COLAs. And for some additional lane shifts. And so all those salaries compound every year. So unless those increases, so the step plus the COLA are 2.5% or less, or there is a new source of revenue or enough new growth, then the city or town will not be able to keep up with those increases without making cuts elsewhere. So that is the really unfortunate reality of Prop 2.5. So next slide. This shows the fiscal stability funding, the stabilization funding since its creation and how it has been used. And then if you go to the next slide, this is this information in a graph form. So it's a history of the contributions and then the uses of the fiscal stability plan since it started in FY14. With the passage of that override, some of the funds were used to make up the FY14 shortfall. And the stabilization fund was created with the remaining $774,000. As you can see, since the creation of the fiscal stability stabilization fund, we have used the funds in FY19, 20, and 21. That's the blue bars below. And then in 24, 25, 26. In the last 3 years, we have used considerably more to support the budget. And those funds were used exclusively to support the MPS budget at 128 million in FY24 and 2 million in FY25. And then in FY26, 1.4 million was used for MPS and to support the increases in fire rescue. So starting in FY24, we have begun to use more than we are putting into that fund. Okay, this slide shows the percent increase over the prior year for spending for the Northampton Public Schools since 2000. So you can see that prior to 2014, when, so that's that change in color, when the fiscal stability plan was started, the percent increase year to year fluctuated pretty wildly. And that average in that time was a 2.1% increase for the Northampton Public Schools. Then after 2014, it stabilized, and in the last 4 years has had large increases, which equaled that 32% increase. So since 2014, those increases average out to 4.82% increase for the Northampton Public Schools. So, you know, again, I believe that this is the greatest benefit of the fiscal stability plan, as illustrated on this slide. Okay, so looking forward, this slide shows a 5-year operating budget and the projecting years. So I know this is impossible to see. I see people raising their glasses. This is comes out of the budget book. This is the revenue. This one is the revenue side. FY 2026 is the blue column with the budget of 130 million. This is the plan that we showed in the FY26 budget book, but reflects the changes in state aid and the MPS budget that ended up happening. So we are now currently working on updating the FY27 chart with projections. And then if you go to the next slide, this is the expenditure side of that. Okay. Next. Let's talk about projections and what we know now, and what we need to still need to know. So this is the real and personal property estimate. So with the automatic 2.5% increase, and an estimate on new growth at $875,000, we know that we can raise an additional $2.89 million. Then next is state aid. So this is coming from the governor's budget, which was released last week. As a reminder, this does not include the offsets such as library and incoming school choice. So the top sections are the revenues we see from the state, and then the bottom sections are the assessments that we owe to the state. So the net state aid is calculated by subtracting the assessments from the revenues. So there is a net decrease to the city over FY25 of $333,547. So as you can see, Chapter 70 only increased $196,000 for both districts combined. Charter tuition reimbursement is up by $81,000. UGA is up 2.49% at $136,000. So all told, it's an increase of $411,000 in revenue, but we are seeing mostly increases in the assessments we owe, with the biggest being regional transit is up 252,000. Charter sending is up 242,000. School choice is up 240,000 for a total increase in what we owe the state of $715,248. So it's not good news, though I will caution before we get too depressed that this often changes a bit. So this is the governor's budget, as I said, then the Senate will release theirs, then the House will release theirs, and it'll go to conference. And there will be some change to this, but out of the gate, it is a decrease, which is not, we've not seen robust increases, but seeing a decrease is a bit disheartening. Projected changes in revenue for FY27. So as a preliminary projection, we anticipate revenues to increase by $3.55 million. Of this $3.55 million, $2.9 million is real and personal property taxes. The balance is being achieved by, again, pushing our local revenue projections. As you can see in the last column, the biggest ones are tax title and interest on taxes, which we don't normally rely on, but are adding in. And then our more common ones like motor vehicle, hotel, motel, cannabis, although, again, as I said, we've been seeing some decreases in cannabis, so we might have to adjust this depending on what we see in the third quarter. Parking revenue, ambulance license and permits, fees, and department revenue. And then again, the largest increase being investment income, which we talked about previously, and we are pushing another $560,000. So these projections are aggressive, and they carry with them some risk, but this is what we are estimating at this moment. Okay, and this is a look at the projected preliminary revenues by percent. And then what we know, these are estimates for expenditure changes. What we know for expenditures is that the retirement contribution will increase by $335,000. We've already talked about the changes on the cherry sheet. For health insurance, prior to January, we had been advised by the GIC to estimate a 9 to 13% increase for FY27. But following the January GIC meeting, we were told that 11 new communities were joining the GIC, most of them fleeing from the HCGIT, and changes to copays and deductibles were being proposed to lower the increase to an estimated 4 to 8% increase. We have kept the estimate at the 9%, the higher side of the estimate, until we actually learn the what the rate will be as this keeps changing. And we'll learn that, I think, around March. We are planning a larger than 4% increases for the schools this year. And we have removed all of the funding for capital projects out of the budget this year, or sorry, next year. So those relatively known increases total $4.85 million. Our as we talked about, our estimated known revenue is only $3.55 million. So this leaves a gap of $1.3 million. And that is what is known. What is unknown right now are city department increases and other insurances which need to be worked on. So that is the situation we're looking at this current moment. And then particular concerns that we have. Again, we are concerned about the federal grants that we receive. Northampton Public Schools receive an estimated $1.5 million in federal entitlement grants. We have been told to expect that Title II, III, and IV grants totaling approximately 119,000 will be eliminated at this moment. We don't know, we're hopeful that others won't. These, school grants support all sorts of things like special education costs and English language learners and high-risk students. So, we're very concerned about potential cuts to those grants. And Smith Voc receives an estimated 482,000 in federal grants. All non-school city apartments have about $2 million in federal grants total. So we're concerned about all of that. We are concerned about Medicaid reimbursements, which are dropping. And, as we talked about before, we have heavily relied on reserves the last 3 years to support the budget. And in addition to all of these factors, there is continuing economic uncertainty. I feel like I say that every year, and it's shocking that we've sort of had as robust an economy as we have had. Everything I read is that we are on the precipice of something. So, I don't know when that bubble is going to pop, but it is something that we certainly are concerned about. So this is the budget calendar. We are right here at the first one, January 29th. Then the next is April 16th is the deadline for NPS and Smith Voc to submit their adopted budgets to the mayor. Then I must submit the proposed City of Northampton FY27 budget to the City Council by May 15th. It's actually May 16th, but that's a Saturday. And then June 30th is the deadline for the City Council to have held a public hearing and to vote on the proposed FY27 budget. So that is the schedule going forward. And that is it. Thank you all for surviving that document. And of course, I want to always thank Director Nardi, who's worked incredibly hard on this. So I thank her for all of her hard work. We're going to let's take a 10-minute recess. And then we will come back and have discussion. Okay, so back here at 8:25. And we are back. Thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on to questions or discussion. First up, Member Stein.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation tonight. I had a few, and I'll try to be brief. I had a few sort of observations I wanted to share, and then 2 questions. And if it's okay with you, I'll just sort of lay them out and then can respond. Great. So, few observations. I was struck in the slide regarding the operating budget to see the MPS Special Education Stabilization Fund listed, right? So it was the 350,000 it represented as part of that 1.49% of the operating budget, which means that we're treating funds that we say are being used for unbudgeted and unplanned costs for special education as budgeted operational money. All right, so at least the 200,000 from Medicaid reimbursement that's getting passed through is just being used for planned and budgeted expenses. And it's likely that the remaining 150 is also being used for planned or budgeted expenses as well, but we haven't disentangled that. So I know we like to say that it has that purpose, but even seeing it on a slide where we talk about our operating budget presumes we're planning to use that money, which means we're, it's operating. I just want to say, 45% of the operating budget goes to support MPS. This is that $59 million figure that includes all the other stuff. And that's really unsurprising because it's the single largest city service by every metric. We had this other slide that said we're $16.9 million above net school spending, but I'd love to know if we could even operate our schools if we cut 16.9 million from the budget. Would we have to have all our staff salaries? What would the average class size be, et cetera? It's sort of like a meaningless number because you could not operate a school at that level. There are many municipalities that are facing budget deficits, but we are facing budget surpluses each year. Right? And just like last observation of my questions is all of the percent increases for the MPS budget in this presentation are restricted to the portion of our operating budget that comes from the local appropriation, right? That's the Chapter 70, and then what the city provides from local taxes and fees. Our actual operating budget is larger. Some of that was described tonight, the federal grants that do not flow through this operating budget to us, but flow directly to us. So the percentages here matter and they're emphasized a lot, but there's a lot of caveats that I think would be helpful for folks. So my 2 questions. First has to do with the debt service, right? We have 5 million in change for FY26, which just represents 3.9% of the operating budget. I think I saw on the Excel sheet roughly a similar figure for FY27. But my understanding from the conversations around the geothermal bonding at council and at school committee is that we're going to have a significant portion of the current debt service retired this year. I believe when it was mentioned, it was like up to $1 million coming off with about, I don't know, $500,000 added on for the geothermal. So the question is like, how much is the debt service dropping year over year if we include the new geothermal bonding that we talked about and approved? And where can we see the details of bonds and the related projects that are being serviced by that operating budget? Like where can we see those 5 to 20-year loans? How much is left on those loans, what they're for, et cetera. The second question I have relates to sort of the process going forward. In an earlier slide, it was described that the process for establishing this budget will be that the mayor will work with the finance director and department heads to maintain services and identify needs. The overwhelming majority of this work is conducted behind closed doors, and with the exception of the 2 school districts, right, which meet openly, there's not a lot of transparency into that process. And I'm wondering if the mayor could share more about her approach to weighing the various needs of the cities and making budget decisions in accordance with the values. Like we have limited resources. How do we decide to impose cuts on one department and not another? How do we understand needs beyond percentage increases? And how do those decisions sort of play out as the budget is developed? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the last question first. So, I mean, how the process that Director Nardi and I do with the department heads is a parallel process to what the superintendent does with the principals of the schools. So, and well, I mean, as far as I know, I'm not part of that process, but I view it as parallel. Director Nardi meets with department heads, and then I meet with her. I meet with the department heads individually as well. Often there's a back and forth that happens many times. Generally, my directive is keep your budgets to as low an increase, generally a 2.5% increase as possible. We are often stripping out things in departmental budgets. We go back and look at what's in generally in operations, which the bulk of a budget is going to be personnel, but in the operational side, we will go in and just like, I will kind of nickel and dime it as much as I can. And we look at, what changes have been made. Sometimes there are requests for increases. Sometimes they are granted, often they're not. But it's a long process that goes over quite a few weeks. And we are generally on the city side, trying to maintain services as best we can. But, the first thing we focus on is the PS, and then we strip back anything else we can to try and keep those budgets as low as we can. Some of the departments serve the schools as well, like IT. IT certainly is a challenging area because it's ever growing and the needs are ever growing. And so there have been some IT increases because it serves the entire, serves the schools and the city. So that's a little bit of that process. It is, it's really challenging. Every year we have increased the school budget quite a bit. We've increased some department budgets. We've cut some department budgets. It is a puzzle as we try and we have to have a balanced budget, and we are just trying to fit as much as we possibly can in and meet sort of the most critical needs. Last year, we did an increase to fire rescue, which will roll into this year, and that was after multiple years of conversation that I had with the chief and deputy chiefs, and we worked with Director Nardi to figure out how we were going to build in that increase over time. And it didn't happen right away. It had to wait a couple of years. But so it's very planned and often takes time to do any sort of considerable changes. Director Nardi, are you able to respond to the debt service question right now, or is that something we'd have to get back to Member Stein on?
Good evening, everyone. I am here, so I can answer a portion of it. So if you look at the budget book, we do talk about the debt. We don't actually list the projects, and it was certainly I was going to something I was going to talk to the mayor about, that we can add some detail. But if you go into the budget book, it talks about the debt and where our debt is now, what it looks like in the out years. But there has been questions about debt going forward and where the projects are in that debt schedule. So my conversation with the mayor as we move forward this year was going to be add some more of that detail that has been requested.
Okay. And just a comment to a comment. I agree that required net school spending would not be remotely sufficient. We should all tell it to DESE, right? I mean, that is their calculation, and if that changed, then I think our state aid would have to change as well. So that would be very helpful. Member Davis.
Thank
Oh,
you.
sorry, Counselor Davis. Apologies.
Thanks. I didn't even hear the difference. Thanks. Could you clarify what I think I heard you say about reducing? I think I heard you say all capital projects, or maybe for a particular year. I scribbled it down as you said it because I didn't know what you meant.
So there had been some capital built into the operating budget that we have stripped out of the budget. So it's now funded just by just by the other sources. It's a recommendation to have some amount of capital built into your operating budget to account for things that happen throughout the year. And it had been our practice for a long time, but in the last couple of years, we've had to push more revenues elsewhere. We've stripped that out of the operating budget. So I think that's what you heard me say. Counselor Nabad.
Okay, so I have a few questions. They might seem like silly questions.
Not at all.
Um, so one question is, when will we know about free cash for from 2026? Another question is, why can't we just discontinue the capital stabilization fund and put it somewhere else? Another question is, what are the rules about free cash and the use of free cash? So those are 3 questions there. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, hold on. So free cash gets certified by DOR usually. So you have to close the books from the fiscal year. And it's usually certified somewhere in November or December, although I actually just talked to some mayors at MMA and they hadn't had their free cash certified yet. So we get ours in on time, and ours was the certification was a bit late last year. For what reason, I don't know. DOR does it. Generally, it happens in around December. So that is when we would know that. Why can't we discontinue the capital stabilization fund? We could, it certainly would not be advised before, if you remember that chart where I showed the stabilization funds over many years, in 2012, we had been down to less than $5,000 in capital stabilization. So as defined now, a capital project is something over $10,000. And so you wouldn't be able to fund, at that amount, you wouldn't have been able to fund any capital projects from that fund. So, it's important to have capital stabilization to maintain our infrastructure, to maintain our resources, to be able to help fund our capital plan. There'd been really, back when there was no funds to speak of, their projects weren't happening. And so we are still, I think, acutely feeling that deferred maintenance in many ways. Obviously we have 160 miles of roadway, and we've increased funding for paving, we've increased funding for sidewalks, but there's so much that needs to be done. So without that stabilization fund, we would be less able to keep up with our capital needs, and things would fall into further disrepair. We would have to delay projects too, and we've seen, sometimes even a delay of a few months on a project you can have a big cost increase or a big change from what's been estimated for that project to what it gets bid at. So I wouldn't recommend it. The rules for free cash. So the recommendation is that it should be only used for one-time expenses. DOR they have best practices around free cash that I shared with the council at one of the last meetings. you know, it is not considered a recurring revenue source. DOR is very clear that it's a non-recurring revenue source. So it should be used for one-time funds, but there are not actual restrictions on it by the state. But you know, it needs to have careful use, because if you use it for something that's going to continue the next year and grow larger, then you're going to find yourself in a deficit. It fluctuates, and as you saw from ours, it has been decreasing. I think I answered all of them for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, Councilor Loisel.
Thank you. Well, first, it was good to hear about how far along we are on the pension funding schedule. I think sounds like we're going to be ahead of the game, so that's good. Good planning, I guess. I had a couple questions. One is, I'll just run them off. Do we tax as high as we're allowed for motel and meals taxes? That's one. And these two are things that came up at the MMA session with the person from the Department of Local Services. And I'm not sure I understand the questions, but I think they're important to ask. So bear with me while I struggle through it. But one is, he said something about residential exemptions on property taxes shifting from lower end to higher end. It's a powerful tool and only the executive can do it. I don't think that means the difference between commercial and residential. I think it's something within the residential property, but if that makes sense to you and you can talk to it, that would be great. If not, I'll see if I can get more information about it. And did you talk about the circuit breaker fund, what the balance is in that? And how much of it we're using and how much we expect we might get? And those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, remind me what the first one was, Ann?
Do we tax as high as
Okay.
we're allowed for, yeah.
For meals, you asked, right?
And hotel,
So
I mean,
so we have pushed those revenues considerably in the last couple years. There's not allowed versus not allowed. And we make a projection based, it's been hard with the pandemic because those plummeted. And Director Nardi, you can help me with this, but when projecting them for the next year, you used to take a 3 or 5 year average of the previous years. It's been a lot harder since the pandemic. But
no, what I meant was, isn't there like a local tax that you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Okay.
Do we exercise the maximum of the local excise option? And the answer is yes. For the local excise taxes, we do the maximum that the state allows
And you're talking about meals and hotels.
Hotel, motel,
Okay.
meals.
Okay, great. That was
Director
it.
Nardi, am I missing cannabis? Is it just a solid 3, or I guess we could collect less if we wanted to.
Yeah, cannabis is 3%. And we are at the maximum for all 3 of those.
Yeah.
Mayor,
Sorry.
I have a point of order.
Yes.
Thank you. The chat should only be used for technical difficulties. I see members and counselors using it. That's not an appropriate use of a chat.
Oh, agreed. It also is potentially a
Thank you.
violation of open meeting law. Thank you. The residential exemptions on properties, Director Nardi, do you know anything about this?
I'm sorry, you said about the, say that again?
Councilor Loisel, could you repeat what you heard at MMA?
Yeah, it was Sean Cronin, and he said that the residential exemption is a powerful tool for the executive office. It's a shift from a lower end to a higher end.
So it's a residential, it's an abatement. So the residential, so we've, I think it's the assessor, Mark Dotrell and I have talked about this, and so not a lot of communities, I think, have adopted this. Is this the senior exemption you're talking about?
No,
No, residential, I don't know
No,
any, no.
okay. I'll get more information, and probably the appropriate time to talk about it is when the assessor comes to present. So
If I might
Yeah.
give information, the residential exemption has a problem because it doesn't cover rental properties. So that's a bit of the challenge there.
So I think what we'll do, Counselor Lozelle, is I will talk with the assessor more about that and get more information. So I don't want to wait too long. So thank you for bringing it up. And thank you for the clarification, Counselor Stratton.
Okay.
and
Counselor,
the final question was the circuit breaker question.
apologies. Director Nardi, do you have circuit breaker information? Oh, did you give me?
I do. It is, I do have it. I just have to pull it up.
So the balance is $1,176,096. NPS received $878,117 in FY25, which they carried over for use in FY26, which is the general practice. And in addition, where's the rest of my notes? In addition, MPS has received 490,000 total for 2 of 4 payments, which is our normal practice.
I think it would be just easier just to give the balance. And I do think I sent this to Business Director Jones just to verify, but I did their balance is in there. And I'm trying to think where I put that detail. Oh, I know.
Was Councilor Loisel asking about the education circuit breaker tax credit or the senior citizen circuit breaker?
Thanks for asking. Let's raise hands to be recognized. Councilor Loisel, you were talking about education?
Yeah. Mhm.
Director Nardi, were you still looking for something or?
No, I'm just because there's a lot of details in here.
I do see Bobby, who's the business administrator for the schools, has raised her hand. So, hi, Bobby. Can you answer that for us? That would be awesome. Welcome.
Yeah, I don't have the balances with me, but what I can tell you is that for and we use that, you can carry it over for 1 year. So we're typically budgeting from the previous year what we're going to use. So that's the balance there. But we can't keep it over the 1 year. And then there's a second piece to that, which is the extraordinary circuit breaker. And that has to be spent in the same year that it's received. So I don't know if that helps at all, but certainly feel free to contact me if you have more questions.
So the balance right now is 1,176,000. But as Director Jones noted, not all of that money, that some of that money is reimbursement that would be generally carried over the next year, as she said. But it can also be used. That's up to the school and the school committee.
Well, it has to be used.
Right, but you can carry over the reimbursement that you're getting this year to next year and use it next year, right?
Correct.
Right, so that's what I meant, so.
1 year only, yeah.
Right, exactly. Otherwise, it then gets closed to the general fund and comes to the city.
Correct. Well, yeah, correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bobby, for that. next is Counselor Robbins.
Thank you. And Mayor, I really admire your quick ability to record multiple questions and remember what's going to come next. It's a gift. And I'm not going to make it easier. Sorry. One of the things that popped up for me, we are really, I think as a city, it was a horrible snowstorm. It's been awful to dig out of, but people going downtown today said, what happened to the snow? And thank you. Thank you to the DPW. Thank you to disappearing it. Everyone wants to know where it went, but that can be your mystery.
It's an amazing operation last night to remove it. So thank you for acknowledging it. And I also very much thank the DPW for that.
When you want to release where our snow went, it would be great to know. But I was curious when you said that we will have additional costs for that snow removal. And I'm old enough to remember when we used to do a lottery with the mayor about whether we should take out insurance for snow removal, where we were guessing about how much snow we would get each year. And I wondered, because we did not get a presentation on the enterprise funds, on the income and the expenditures of that, will those costs come out of the enterprise funds? That's question one. Do you want me to keep going?
It's up to you. We can do them one by one, or.
And I also will just say, I thought I saw in the draft cherry sheet that the governor was going to fully fund the circuit breaker. And I may have been wrong about that, but it kind of jumped off the page at me when I took a quick look. It was a huge sort of wow. So I don't know if we'd consider that. Okay, so my second question was, it's about the mid-year appropriation for the schools, and had you considered that in your estimation of what we need to be looking at for FY27? I know a lot of folks would like to know what your thinking is around that. Number three was, it seemed as though there's a difference in the amount of reserves that you showed us today on the slides from this year than we saw from last year. So it would be good to know how those reserves were used. And my final one, another question that I think is really on a lot of folks' minds, is in your, I'm sure we'll see it in your first draft budget, but in those reserves, are you fairly confident? And do you have a number for your estimated projection of what the cost for the FY27 costs for redesign of Main Street will be to the city? Those are my questions.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so Director Nardi on snow and ice.
So yes, so snow and ice, we budget 500,000. We do not get insurance anymore. We are allowed to overexpend that line. It's one of the lines that we are allowed to overspend and leave it unspent until the end of the year. So we don't have insurance for it, but we have enough, and we don't need the insurance because we have enough reserves to cover it. And no, none of that comes out of the enterprise funds. The enterprise funds do not fund the general fund budget. That is a general fund item and doesn't get covered by the enterprise funds. That's question one.
Yes. So the mid-year appropriation is not factored into this presentation. This happened, that vote happened late last week. And this is a huge presentation to put together. So, and we haven't made decisions around it yet. So no. There is a difference in the reserves from last year to this year. They're always going to be different every year. Last year, I'm trying to remember, last year, they probably looked lower because they had been, because we had, am I right, Director Nardi, that we'd done capital at that point?
So yes, so last year we did capital in December. And the reserves are all affected by the orders that are approved by city council. So they are all laid out on the city council agendas and approved by council. So that is if you see them go down, that is the reason why. So it was capital for FY 2026 last year. And we just did like the climate, we just did the solar, the geothermal. So that affected the climate mitigation stabilization fund. We also did, I think last March we did, or is it the summer, we did something for the emergency repairs at Memorial Hall. So that order affected it. So those type of orders have impacted the reserves from this year to last year to this year.
And I don't say confidence in reserves is sort of an interesting way to put it. I mean, those are solid numbers, so I know what's in there. So yes, I'm confident in those numbers. But, and then we do not have any updated estimate for Main Street at this point. You know, we had the estimates for the underground infrastructure, and we are still waiting to get 100% design sort of finalized or certified. So we do not have an updated estimate for it at this time. Okay. Next, Member Davis, I think I'm going to go to people who haven't yet spoken. Okay. So Member Counselor Stratton.
So, with regard to, capital expenditures, I think it's really important that we maintain the clarity between the general fund budget and the verb to budget. And, the mayor has said that in the past, we used to, in the general fund budget, have a line for capital, but that was only ever a fairly small amount of the capital expenditure in a given year. Token would be a little bit of an understatement, but it was a minority. So that it's not that we're not budgeting verb for capital. We're not including capital in our general fund. We are budgeting for capital outside of the general fund. And basically, because we view capital as a one-time expense, something that maybe could be deferred if we were, short of cash, we're basically budgeting for our future capital in the money we leave on the table in our overly conservative estimates. Yes, there's an uncertainty, but we're inflating this uncertainty by the amount of capital we want to have available in our capital budgeting of the coming year. Sorry, I had a question and I'm not remembering that right now. So maybe I will let go of things for the moment.
Okay. I will just note, so we are, at this point, we are not being overly conservative with our estimates. And we are actually overall above sort of the recommendation of what we are estimating for pushing our revenues. Director Nardi, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, I also want to just mention, so we aren't just budgeting for capital, although that is part of it. We are also budgeting because we also want to be sustainable over multiple years. So we don't want to use all our revenues and then have nothing for the out years as budgets increase. So
but our capital,
excuse me,
I'm sorry, please don't interrupt.
is a part of that number.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry. Please don't interrupt when
Thank
someone is speaking.
So that is also a reason that we budget as we do. So.
Excuse me. Can I just ask Director Nardi to repeat the answer?
Oh, sure.
I got distracted and I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So just part of the reason we budget to leave some on the table, using Councillor Stratton's words, is also because we want to make sure that we can afford the budgets that we have multiple years out. So that is another reason that we want to leave some left on the table for the out years, so that as things increase, as we all know the budgets do, we have enough left to do that in the out years.
Okay, Council President Maori.
Hi, thanks for this presentation. I was just curious about our reserve funds, our stabilization funds, how we compare to other communities and the amount we have and the kind of diversity we have in them, and how that, I don't know, might impact our 5 to 7% versus 3 to 5%. Yeah, I've never seen a comparison with other communities in terms of reserve and stabilization funds.
Okay, so one of the charts we had was a comparison of percent of budget. Which is the best way to do an apples to apples comparison, because communities are different sizes and have very different size budgets. So I don't remember which slide number that is. But if you remember, there was one slide that showed our general stabilization as a comparison, and then there was another that was all of our stabilizations except for enterprise as a comparison. So in those 11 with those 11 comparison communities, we were, for general stabilization, we were at the lower end, but we have additional stabilization accounts, sort of specialized ones, as we talked about. So for when you add those all in, but you don't include enterprise, which are closed systems, then we are at the higher end of those 12 communities, but not nearly as high as Amherst and East Hampton in terms of percent of budget.
Okay, and the specialized funds, if I may follow up. I mean, do we have more specialized funds than other communities, you think, generally, or the comparison communities?
We do. I mean, there are communities that have a special education stabilization fund. There aren't a ton of them. I think we are, I don't know if unique, but most communities don't have like a climate action stabilization fund, which is, a choice that we made using some of our ARPA funds. But generally they have like a general and they have a capital stabilization, at least those two. And then for their enterprises, they may or may not have stabilization funds for them. But we have a couple sort of specialized ones that we've developed, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Director Nardi, were you going to add something? Yeah.
Thank you. So I think one of the unique things about Northampton is many communities leave their funds in free cash. The challenge with that is free cash is not available all year. So if you have something catastrophic happen in July or August, your free cash may not be certified. Because again, as the mayor said, every community is different, and some get their free cash certified in September or October. That is usually the process time in the fall. But if you don't have free cash and all your money's there and it hasn't been certified, the municipality does not have the flexibility to address that issue. Over the years, it has been the thought of the mayor and the council to have stabilization funds. And again, they're reserves. The money is not spent, put in these different categories to kind of earmark and say, this is a priority. Climate change is a priority for us. Capital projects are a priority, so we're going to build this up. And then the general stabilization is just so you have it all year round, because free cash goes away. So I want to just say that's a benefit. And it's true, not every community has stabilizations, but more and more are adopting them as they get the reserves.
Okay. All right. I think everyone who has their hand raised has already spoken. So is there anybody who has not yet participated who would like to? Okay. Member Sainer Sullivan.
Hi, and thank you very much for your presentation. Just have a real question out of curiosity. I don't know if you can answer it, but we're a minimum aid community based on the Chapter 70 formula, which hurts us as far as state aid. Do you know of any other communities in the area that are in the same boat?
Oh, I had a number somewhere and I don't have it off the top of my head. There are many communities. So in the last couple years, many more communities have tipped over into this status.
Mhm.
And there's, ugh, I have a number somewhere. It's a fairly significant number of communities in the Commonwealth at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to folks who have already spoken. Again, if you want, anyone else wants to speak, let me know. Okay, so Counselor Davis.
This is really brief. I just wanted to speak to the chat issue. And there was a question about why it might be violating open meeting law, and I believe that it's because the chat can't be preserved for the record. Is that, and that I think is the reason that it might be violating open meeting law. And it's hard because there were some very meaty conversations happening in the chat that I was looking at, and I think that it disappears on Zoom. But I just wanted to just mention that.
Thank you. I mean, so I would say not everyone has access to the chat. And so, if people are watching and aren't on the Zoom, but are watching on NOM or some other way, they don't have access to the chat. So it's not equal public access to everybody. And it wouldn't be part of, if someone was watching the video later, it would not be part of that conversation. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, Member Stein.
Just a few quick points. I'll start with the chat. Just like a Google document that you're allowed to work on together during a public meeting isn't captured in the transcript and yet is allowable, a chat like this is also allowable, and it is saved to the Google Cloud account owned by the city, and you can't access it. So I don't know. I just don't find that believable, and it does feel frustrating the constant refrains to shut down conversations or spaces where we're already so limited. It feels very strange to me that this is seen as remotely problematic when what's being expressed are information about some of these issues directly related to what we're talking about tonight and the choices we're all going to have to face together. I would request that in future presentations, when we do highlight reserve percentages and suggest things like, well, not every city has enterprise funds, that when we're going to compare ourselves to 11, we actually show what other reserve accounts they have, if they do or do not have enterprise funds, and where we actually stack up apples to apples. Because I think it's a much more meaningful comparison and gets to the heart of what Councilor Maori was asking about. And the other thing I would say is, there's over 200 municipalities, I believe, in the state that are minimum aid. And they're minimum aid because either of declining enrollment, but most likely because of relative wealth, right? So like the reason why Northampton doesn't get more Chapter 70 aid is based on the income of our city's residents and the property values. Those are the two largest factors. And it's why many of the comparison districts, such as South Hadley and Greenfield, Chicopee, are much poorer than us, which means they get more state aid because they're much poorer. So we bear a higher proportion of this expensive because we're relatively wealthy. It's a problem in general. The state should be giving us more money, but Northampton is not being singled out and penalized. And it's a reflection of our relative wealth compared to other communities who receive more money than we do. The last change to Chapter 70 in the Student Opportunity Act looked at the formula. We did not get any more money, right? But it did direct significant resources to many cities, many gateway communities where they're much poorer and cannot fund them on the local level. And of the communities that you look at that receive Chapter 70 money that are in hold harmless or flat or aren't getting increases, we, of the comparison districts that are provided here tonight, we are in the cluster with Longmeadow and Amherst, and we spend almost as much of net school spending as Longmeadow, and we spend significantly less than Amherst. So I think when we do these comparisons, we need much more data so that we can draw more relevant comparisons between who we are and who they are and how to actually judge from this information. Similar to last point, similar to net school spending, if we're going to say we're doing so much above what's the minimum and we know the minimum couldn't sustain anything, we're sort of pretending we're doing a lot better than the reality requires. Thank you.
Hey, Counselor Nabad.
Yes, thank you. So a question is two more. What defines smart growth is the first question. Well, I guess another part of that is how can we grow more? And then the next question is what is the deadline for spending the ARPA funds? Thank you.
Okay. Smart growth, I'm not prepared to give you like a definition on that right now. But I'm happy to talk to you about it more. And ARPA funds, Director Nardi, have to be expended by December 26th.
Yeah, so there's two categories. If there's any construction, that needs to be done by September 2026, and all other projects, all funds must be spent by December 2026.
Thanks.
Just to be clear, all our funds have been allocated.
Okay, Counselor Stratton.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify briefly what Member Stein said, and then I had my question that I finally remembered. With the state Chapter 70 formula, there is an assessment against communities that's based on their local property value and an assessment that's based on their residents' income. And Northampton has a relatively high property value in the state context, but a relatively low income. So, for example, if the state were to drop the property aspect of Chapter 70 and base it all on income, we would get much more aid. A few communities would do worse. And you could argue, if we were the state legislature, you could argue you like give a community the best of either option. But we're not the state legislature. So that's kind of, by the wayside. We can't change the aid formula. My question really concerned something Director Nardi said that I think is not widely known, which is that the free cash certification expires at the end of the fiscal year, and then you can't spend from it. You can only spend basically from stabilization funds for the rest of the year until we get our new free cash certification in December. And that's not widely appreciated, but it's key. However, the end of the fiscal year is months away at this point. And there seems to be this traditional rush to put away a bunch of the free cash, about a third of the free cash, in our stabilization funds, which I find very weird because if you look at the last 3 years, and I'm looking at my screenshot from earlier here, FY 24, 25, and 26, we've both spent from the Fiscal Stability Fund and put money into it. And it strikes me as very weird that we would both put money in and out of the same fund in the same year because we put it in January or February when we don't really know what we're going to need, and then we end up pulling back from it. And so I'm really just wondering, what's the rush to put money in the stabilization fund now when we haven't really worked through the whole budget? We haven't seen what the GIC is going to charge us. I know I misspoke last week and said trust, but it's the GIC. I'm trying to understand why people feel it is so important to pass this financial order in January or early February rather than sort out our spending and then put our savings away. Thank you.
Okay, so I would say there's nothing weird about using some free cash for stabilization funds. I mean, it's one of the recommended uses for free cash. And it is, what you're referring to is our policy on how to use it. Director Nardi, what were you going to share?
My question had to do with how we're both putting money into and out of the Fiscal Stability Fund in the same year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Director Nardi.
So just to comment on that, yeah, I think it's good practice that we refill when we have been spending money out of a reserve. The whole idea is to make sure we're backfilling that for upcoming years and upcoming future expenses. So that's why we do that. And again, it's not intended to be a rush process. As the mayor said, it's part of our policy. Free cash was certified. And again, when we put them in the reserves, that doesn't mean the money is gone. If something catastrophic was to happen, with a order from the mayor, the council can vote to spend that money in whatever way that the mayor feels is appropriate and the council agrees with. So I just wanted to say that, but also I just wanted to mention that the mayor and Dr. Bonner and Dr. Lincoln Holker, we all had a meeting with the senator, and one of the things the mayor was advocating for was, as Councilor Stratton said, some differences that DESE could do, changes in the formula that would benefit Northampton. So that was a very important meeting, and one of the things that we talked about was with the foundation budget. When some of the changes were made, the foundation budget increased, but there is a split between what the city has to pay and what the state will pay. So when they increase the foundation budget, they actually, what in turn happens for a community, it's a 59-41% split. And so our percentage, we ended up paying more. So what they intended when they increased the foundation budget did not work for many communities, including Northampton. So I just wanted to echo that, yes, these are some of the things that the leaders of our community have been advocating for with DESE and our senators and representatives. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Council President Maori.
Yeah. I actually just had a process comment from before, which was that using the chat to put substantive comments is interrupting. It's speaking out of turn because we all see the notifications. They weren't even chatting privately to each other. So it's a way of speaking out of turn, and it's unfair to the rest of the committees and the council.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Then I'm going to go to Councilor Nabad.
I just want to thank President Maori for pointing that out because I found those side conversations distracting and maybe emotional. And so the combination of the emotion and the distraction is not helpful for me. So thank you.
Okay. Councilor Stratton.
Well, I mean, I think this really raises the question whose meeting this is. I would point
It is
out that
mine.
neither the mayor nor Director Nardi actually answered my question. You talked around the subject, but you didn't address it. If this were a meeting of the city council, I would observe that the mayor is not actually a member of the body. Last week, she falsely said that the charter makes her recognized, but that's actually only the council rules. Okay, I've just learned tonight is the mayor's meeting. But, if this were the city council, I think there could be a little more insistent that, questions actually be answered and not just talked around. Thank you.
I'm sorry I made a mistake last week. It was not purposeful. I saw a hand for a moment, but I don't see it any longer. All right. If there are no further questions or discussion, I'm doing a little scroll through. Then we could move to adjourn the three different bodies, and I will just thank you all very much for sticking with this long evening. I appreciate all of you and your questions and your participation. So thank you again for doing this work with me. And Laura, I see that you are unmuted. Are you ready to take motions to adjourn?
I certainly am.
Okay,
I move
Shall we
that the
start?
city council adjourns.
Seconded.
Motion's made by Councilor Loizell, seconded by Vice President Clemmer.
I move that the school committee adjourn.
Wait, thank you for that, but let's do them one at a time if that's okay. For
That'd
Laura.
be great. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilor Davis,
Yes.
Councilor Dobbs,
Yes.
Councilor Clemmer,
Yes.
Councilor Lois.
Yes.
Councilor Robbins,
Yes, and thank
and
you.
Sure, you're welcome. And Councilor Stratton.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, councilors.
You.
And Member Mahoney?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Member Mahoney and seconded by Vice Chair Bartoli. Roll call, please, when you're ready, Laura.
Okay. Mayor Shara,
Yes.
Member Bartoli,
Yes.
Member Wiesenfround,
Yes.
Member Montgomery Tamaclo?
Tamaclo, yes.
Okay, Member Stein,
Yes.
Member Martin,
Yes.
Member Mahoney,
Yes.
Member Reese,
Yes.
Member Jewell,
Yes.
and Member Sainer Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, school committee. Member Martin, quickly, what's your cat's name? I need to know a cat's name if it appears.
Sophie.
Oh
She's
my goodness.
19.
Sophie looks like the biggest snuggle bug. Good night, and good night, Sophie. Okay.
I move that the Smith Vocational and Agricultural High School Board of Trustees adjourns.
I second it.
Thank you, Dr. Bonner.
You're so welcome.
I think it's just us.
Okay. Member Kalan,
Oh, well,
Yeah.
too bad. Okay.
okay. Member Spencer Robinson,
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
okay.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Shara,
Yes.
Dr. Bonner.
Yes, and thank you for the presentation, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all. Okay, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.